Hello students, this is a audio review of Reconstruction policies and problems of the post-Civil War period, and this will help you when we have a quiz on Thursday. So I'm going to elaborate on some things to help you recall the information we've learned about. Alright, I'm going to just run down some of the Reconstruction policies. And you should already know what Reconstruction is. It's a time period after the Civil War where all the 11 Confederate states were readmitted back into the Union. There was a step-by-step process that they had to go through, particularly the southern states, so they can rejoin the Union. Also included rights, particularly civil rights, given to African Americans by way of the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and Reconstruction Acts and the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. Alright, number one, it says Southern military leaders could not hold office. What that basically meant was that Southern military leaders could not serve in the federal government because they were not trusted by the Republicans in Congress to be loyal to the Union again and outlaw slavery and basically get back in line with the Union and do what they're supposed to do. So they couldn't hold public office. They couldn't serve in the government. They could later on, and that had negative consequences. African Americans could hold public office. Senators, governors were elected to serve in public office who were African American. African Americans gained equal rights as a result of the Civil Rights Act of 1866. And in order for that to happen, there had to be use of federal troops for its enforcement. If federal troops weren't there, African American civil rights were not carried out, were not given. You're going to later find out that the Ku Klux Klan was a response to this Civil Rights Act. Northern soldiers supervised the South. The Reconstruction Acts basically said that the South had to be divided up into 5 military districts in order to restore it back into the Union, in order for African Americans to be treated fairly and equally under the law. The Freedmen's Bureau was established by Abraham Lincoln to help former enslaved African Americans in the South find jobs, find employment. They supervised labor contracts between their white boss and themselves, who were the ex-slaves. They set up schools, gave food, clothing, shelter, and it helped African Americans adjust to freedom after the Civil War. Really important to them. Carpetbaggers were individuals who came down from the north to live. They helped stimulate and try to improve the southern economy. They took advantage of southern plantation owners who had lost land. Some bought railroad areas, railroad companies, and they profited off of them, profited off of Southerners at their expense. Black codes, that's what the southern states adopted right after African Americans were emancipated or freed from slavery. And the black codes limited the economic and physical freedom of former slaves, such as they couldn't carry a gun, they had curfew they had to follow, they couldn't rent property, they had a lot of difficulties in just exercising the freedoms that they had won after the Civil War. Here's a picture of a portrait in the U.S. Capitol of the Civil Rights Act of 1866 during its passage. Over here it says the 13th Amendment banned slavery. 14th Amendment gave citizenship and equal protection under the law to ex-slaves. And the 15th Amendment gave voting rights to all men regardless of their skin color. And here's some pictures right here. And the left-hand side shows a Freedmen's Bureau school. You notice that people in here are getting an education. and learning a skill, learning a trade. Over in the right-hand corner right here, you have a carpetbagger. That's a picture of a carpetbagger. Looks like Abraham Lincoln, as you can tell by the stove-top hat. So, again, this is a map of Reconstruction of the South. The green states are the Confederate states, and each state has a year on it that's black or bold. That's when that state was readmitted back into the Union. Each state government had to rewrite a constitution. They had to make new laws. They had to, its legislators had to take an oath that they wouldn't rebel against the Union, and they would not put African Americans into slavery. So that's what they had to do. So it was a long, drawn-out process. And as you can tell, there are military districts in the South because of the Reconstruction Acts. And remember that Southern governments in the southern states, they had to be supervised by Northern or federal troops. 3 important men during Reconstruction that we talked about. You have to make a photo gallery on each individual. You got Abraham Lincoln. His Reconstruction plan called for reconciliation. Reconciliation means that you get over a grudge. You make up for a negative situation. You become friends with somebody. That's what that means. That's what Lincoln was all about. He called for reconciliation. He said that preservation of the Union was more important than punishing the South. Lincoln wanted to reunite the southern states back with the North or the Union as quickly as possible, so to be unity, avoid conflict, to avoid being attacked by a foreign power. Frederick Douglass, abolitionist, he fought for the adoption of constitutional amendments that guarantee voting rights. He was a powerful voice for human rights and civil liberties for all. And he pushed for like the 14th Amendment and 15th Amendment. And also he worked with Lincoln to enlist African American men into the Union Army, particularly after the Emancipation Proclamation. Robert E. Lee, we talked about him, the great Virginian. He urged Southerners to reconcile with Northerners at the end of the war and reunite as Americans when some wanted to continue to fight. People in the South had a lot of bitterness towards the North after the Civil War. He became president of Washington College, which is known now as Washington and Lee University in Lexington, Virginia. He was very loyal to Virginia. He had a strong military background. He even refused to join or lead the Union Army. So, very loyal to Virginia, very loyal to the South. Reconstruction had to come to an end. We learned that Reconstruction ended in 1877. The reasons why Reconstruction came to an end. Reconstruction ended in 1877 as a result of a compromise over the outcome of the election of 1876. This gentleman right here is Rutherford B. Hayes. He was the president after Andrew Johnson and Ulysses S. Grant. And there's a long, detailed background about the compromise over the outcome of the 1876 election. Basically, there was a tie, or nobody won a majority of electoral votes. And Rutherford B. Hayes made a deal. And the deal he came up with is number 2 right here. It says federal troops were removed from the South. And we remember that the federal troops were needed to be down in the South to enforce the Civil Rights Act and the Reconstruction Acts to make sure the South stayed loyal to the Union and make sure white Southerners, the Democrats, would make sure that they would treat African Americans equally, protecting their right to vote, protecting the rights of citizenship, being treated equally under the law. But that wasn't the case, because when those troops were moved from the South, bad consequences happened, which is number 3 down right here. It says rights that African Americans had gained were lost through Jim Crow laws. And Jim Crow laws were basically laws that segregated people based on race. You had separate restrooms, separate buses, separate transportation, separate schools, separate barbershops, separate hospitals, separate public facilities. African Americans and whites were not to mix together in public, in most places, not all. And it served as a disadvantage for African Americans. It gave an advantage to whites. So when Reconstruction ended, it was not a good outcome for African Americans. Not a good outcome at all. We'll talk about Jim Crow later on. And here's a picture of Northern troops leaving the South in New Orleans. Okay, that is all. There will be a quiz that will go along with this review PowerPoint, and it will be on Edpuzzle for you to look at. So enjoy, and remember that you have a quiz on Thursday. It's going to be questions 1 through 20, maybe 1 through 25. So it's important for you to listen to this PowerPoint again and do the quiz that goes with it, so you'll get a good grade and put a smile on my face.